My name is Elena Brooks. For most of my life, people assumed I had nothing, no leverage, no safety net, no power. So when everything began to collapse, they expected fear, they expected excuses, they expected me to beg. I didn't. What shook them wasn't my loss, it was my calm. That's when they realized they'd misjudged me from the start. For most of my adult life, I was the person people called when something went wrong. Not because I had the loudest voice, not because I demanded authority, but because I stayed calm when everyone else panicked. If a bill was overdue, I figured out a payment plan. If paperwork got messy, I stayed up late sorting it out. If someone made a bad decision, I found a way to clean it up quietly, without embarrassing them. No one ever called it sacrifice. They called it Elena being Elena. I worked at a regional logistics company just outside town. Nothing fancy. Long hours, steady pressure, and a constant expectation that problems should disappear before they reached management. I was good at that. Too good. Maybe. When something slipped through the cracks, it somehow always landed on my desk. At home. It wasn't much different. My brother needed help just for a few weeks. My sister needed my name on a document temporarily. My parents needed someone to smooth things over, make the calls, explain things they didn't want to explain themselves. And I did it. Not because anyone forced me, but because I was used to being the one who could handle it. Over time, something subtle happened. People stopped asking if I could help. They assumed I would. When I showed up, the room relaxed. When I stayed quiet, no one noticed. When things went right, it was normal. When things went wrong, it somehow became my responsibility. If you're watching this and thinking, that sounds familiar, you're not alone. There's a strange pattern in families and workplaces. The person who absorbs the most pressure often gets the least recognition, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. Stability becomes invisible when it's consistent. I didn't see it at first. I told myself I was just being reliable, mature, responsible. I believed that if I kept showing up, people would eventually see my value without me having to point it out. But that's not how it works. 7 years went by like that. 7 years of fixing things before they broke completely. 7 years of lending my credibility instead of my money. 7 years of stepping in so no one else had to fall too hard. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, I was reclassified, not as someone capable, but as someone convenient. That's when another misunderstanding set in. People started confusing my silence with a lack of ability, because I didn't argue. They assumed I had no leverage, because I didn't push back. They assumed I had no options, because I didn't talk about what I knew. They assumed I didn't know much at all. Here's something no one tells you. When you don't use your strengths openly, the world forgets they exist. Not because your strengths disappear, but because there's no immediate evidence reminding people of them. Psychologists talk about this in terms of behavioral visibility. Skills that aren't displayed under pressure are often assumed to be gone, especially in environments where noise is mistaken for competence. The quiet person in the room is rarely seen as the most capable one, until something forces that capability to resurface. In my case, nothing dramatic happened at first. No confrontation, no explosion. Just a growing sense that my role had solidified into something smaller than who I actually was. I noticed it in little things. Decisions being made without looping me in. Assumptions about what I could or couldn't handle. Advice being offered to me by people who used to rely on my judgment. It wasn't malicious. It was worse than that. It was casual. That's the danger zone. When people don't mean to diminish you, but do it anyway, because they've grown comfortable with the version of you that carries weight quietly. And the more you adapt to keep the peace, the deeper that version gets locked in. I didn't realize how much of myself I had put on standby until I started feeling tired in a way rest couldn't fix. Not burned out, just unseen. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from always being capable and never being acknowledged for it. From knowing you could handle more, but never being asked to. From being trusted with responsibility, but not with authority. At some point, I stopped correcting people when they underestimated me, not because I agreed with them, but because it felt easier than explaining. That was the mistake. Because when you stop asserting your full self, the world adjusts its expectations downward. And once that happens, climbing back to your real position requires friction. The truth is, my competence never left. It was just dormant, waiting for a moment when being quiet would no longer protect me. I didn't know then what that moment would look like. I only knew that the version of me everyone relied on was the same version they no longer really saw, and that realization changed how I paid attention to everything that came after. 3 weeks after I started noticing how invisible I had become, something finally broke the pattern. It didn't happen during a fight. It didn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when I opened an email I wasn't supposed to receive. My name was on a document I hadn't signed, not forged, not altered, just assumed. Someone in my family had listed me as a guarantor on a financial agreement. A small one, they said. Temporary, they said. Something that would never come back to me, but it already had. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open, rereading the same paragraph over and over. Legal language has a way of stripping emotion out of situations. No drama, no intent, just responsibility. And according to that document, the responsibility was mine. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not panic, fear. The kind that settles in your chest and doesn't move when you take a deep breath. I made a call, then another, then another. No one answered right away. When they did, the tone was casual, almost annoyed. Oh, don't worry about it. It's basically nothing. You always handle these things so well. That sentence landed differently this time. You always handle these things. I'm sorry. I should have asked. Not even, are you okay with this? Just an expectation. Familiar, comfortable, heavy. That night, I didn't sleep. I spread papers across the table, agreements, timelines, emails. For the first time, I looked at everything not as a fixer, but as someone exposed. There were consequences here, real ones. If things went wrong, my credit, my job, my reputation, all tied to decisions I hadn't made. And for the first time in my life, I realized something unsettling. I couldn't solve this quietly, not without absorbing damage. The next morning, I did something that felt wrong in my body. I stopped offering solutions. When my brother called, I didn't interrupt him with ideas. When my sister texted, I didn't respond immediately. When my parents asked what the plan was, I said something I had never said before. I don't know. There was a pause on the other end, then confusion, then irritation. What do you mean you don't know? You're the one who understands this stuff. You've handled worse. That's when it hit me. They weren't asking how to fix the problem. They were waiting for me to step back into the role. And I didn't. I said I needed time. I said I needed clarity. I said I wasn't comfortable moving forward without proper advice. The reaction was immediate, not concern, Not support. Pressure. Subtle at first. You're overthinking. You're being dramatic. This isn't like you. That last one stung, as if the version of me that protected myself was a betrayal of who I was supposed to be. That afternoon, I sat alone in my car outside the grocery store and cried, not because I felt weak, but because I felt awake. And awareness can be painful when it arrives late. I want to pause here, because I know what some of you might be thinking. Is this where I started testing people? Is this where I crossed a line? That question haunted me too. There's a difference between manipulation and self-protection, and the line between them is thinner than people like to admit. Testing someone to control them is wrong. Testing someone because you've been carrying the weight alone for years and need to know whether there's anywhere safe to set it down, that's different. I didn't create a trap. I didn't lie. I simply stopped compensating. I stopped smoothing the edges. I stopped filling the silence. And in that space, people showed me exactly how they saw me. Someone accused me of being selfish. Another reminded me of everything they'd done for me, things I hadn't asked for. One person implied I was trying to make them look bad by not fixing things fast enough. No one asked what this was costing me. That's when the clarity arrived. Not all at once. Not loudly. Just a quiet understanding that settled in my chest. I had been confusing responsibility with worth. I thought being needed meant being valued. I thought fixing problems proved my place. But when I finally stepped back, I saw the truth. My competence had been taken for granted because it was always available. My silence had been mistaken for weakness because it never demanded acknowledgement. Here's something psychology doesn't explain very well, but lived experience does. When you solve problems before they become visible, people forget you're the one holding everything together. And when you stop doing that, they don't always thank you for your past effort. They get angry about the present inconvenience. That week, I spoke to a lawyer for the first time, not to threaten anyone, not to escalate, just to understand where I stood. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to protect everyone else. I was thinking about how to protect myself. That shift felt unnatural, almost wrong. I had been trained by family, by work, by habit to believe that stepping back was the same as abandoning people. But stepping back isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's the only way to see who is walking beside you and who is standing on your shoulders. By the end of that week, I still hadn't solved the problem, but I had done something far more important. I had stopped pretending I could, and in that pause, that uncomfortable, revealing pause, relationships began to show their true shape. Some tightened, some cracked, some disappeared entirely. And that was the moment I understood. The real conflict wasn't the paperwork or the risk. It was what would happen if I didn't step back into the role everyone expected me to play. For the first time, I chose not to. And everything changed after that. The first time I asked for help, I didn't ask for money. I asked for something simpler. Something people say yes to all the time when they trust you. I asked for a signature. 2 days after I met with the lawyer, I had a clearer picture of what the document meant and what could happen if the payments were missed. The amount wasn't enormous, but the risk wasn't small either. One default, one late notice, one collection call, and my name would be the first one attached to it. The lawyer told me, calmly, "You need to get your name off anything you didn't knowingly agree to, and you need to document every conversation from this point forward." That word document stayed with me, so I went home, opened a notebook, and started writing down dates and exact phrases. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I finally understood that "I'm sure it'll be fine" doesn't hold up when someone else is holding the contract. That night, I called my father first. I told myself it was the respectful thing. He was the one who always spoke like he knew the rules of life, the one who believed he could reason his way out of anything, as long as his voice stayed firm. He picked up on the third ring. Elena. What's going on? I kept my voice steady. I told him I needed him to co-sign a release form. Not forever, not for years. Just long enough to shift responsibility back to the person who actually took the agreement out. There was a pause. Not a shocked pause. Not an angry pause. A calculating one. He cleared his throat and said, "I don't think that's necessary. You're making it bigger than it is." I repeated myself. "Slower." He sighed, like I was a child asking for something unreasonable. "Sweetheart," he said, "this is how families work. Sometimes one person carries more, and that person happens to be you. You've always been good at it." Then he said something that almost made me laugh. "I'm not in a position to put my name on anything right now. Your mother and I are reorganizing our finances." Reorganizing. That was his word for it. Later, I would find out what it really meant. But in that moment, I just stared at the wall, holding my phone like it had grown heavier. I thanked him. I ended the call, and I wrote down the phrase, "Not in a position." The next morning, I called my sister, Natalie. She was always busy in a way that sounded important, always driving somewhere, always in between meetings, always with background noise that made you feel like you were interrupting a life that mattered more than yours. She answered with her usual breathless tone. "Hey, I have 5 minutes, what's up?" I explained the situation in the simplest terms possible. I told her I needed someone in the family to back me up, just to help me correct something I hadn't agreed to in the first place. She didn't even let me finish. "Elena, no," she said quickly. "I can't get involved in anything legal. I have too much going on right now." I asked what she meant. She lowered her voice, like she was sharing a secret. "I'm trying to qualify for a mortgage, and anything like that could mess up my profile." "You get it?" Right. I did get it. I got it so clearly it made my stomach turn. Because the same sister who used my name like a spare key now treated my request like a threat to her future. Before I could respond, she added, "But I'm sure it'll work out. You always figure things out. You're the smart one." The smart one. I heard that phrase like an accusation. I thanked her. I ended the call. I wrote it down. You're the smart one. By the third call, I already knew what I was collecting. Not help, information, patterns, excuses that sounded polite until you lined them up next to each other. My brother, Evan, didn't answer. Not once. He texted 2 hours later. "Can't talk. Crazy day. Don't stress. I'll handle it." I stared at that message for a full minute. Because "I'll handle it" was what he always said right before I ended up handling it. 2 days passed. Nothing changed. And that's when I realized the first round wasn't avoidance by accident. It was avoidance by design. They weren't refusing me outright. They were doing something more effective. They were delaying. They were hoping I'd get tired, give up, and solve it myself the way I always had. So the second time I asked for help, I didn't ask for a signature. I asked for something more uncomfortable. I asked for a willingness to stand beside me publicly. A week later, things escalated. Someone at my job pulled me aside after lunch. Not my manager, someone from HR. She didn't look angry. She looked cautious, like she was handling something fragile. "We need to talk," she said. "It's about a concern that was raised." We sat in a small office that smelled faintly of copier toner and stale coffee. She slid a printed page across the table. It was a message, anonymous, full of vague accusations, that I had access to sensitive information, that I had financial issues, that I might not be trustworthy. No proof, no specifics. Just enough smoke to make people look for fire. My heart didn't race. It sank, because I recognized the language. I had heard that tone before at family gatherings, in little jokes, in comments disguised as concern. She worries too much. She's so intense. She always thinks the worst. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about reputation, and reputation is harder to repair than a contract. That night, I called my mother. I didn't ask her to sign anything. I didn't ask her to fix it. I asked her one question. Did you tell anyone about this situation? Her silence lasted too long. Then she said, softly, I didn't mean to. I was just talking to Carolyn. Carolyn, my aunt, the one who always smiled with her mouth and judged with her eyes. My mother rushed to explain. I was worried about you. I needed advice. Advice. That was her word for it. But the result was the same. Something private had become a story. And stories spread fast in small places, especially when they make someone feel superior. I told my mother what had happened at work. I expected shock. I expected her to say, that's not okay. We'll fix this. We'll clear your name. Instead, she said, well, maybe this is a sign you should just let it go. Don't make it worse. Let it go. That was the moment I understood what the second round would reveal. The first round showed me who would avoid inconvenience. The second round showed me who would protect themselves. Even if it meant letting me be blamed, I called my father again. I told him someone had taken what was happening and turned it into an accusation that could cost me my job. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked, what did you do to make people think that I blinked? I actually checked my phone, like maybe the call had switched to someone else. But no, it was him. He continued, Elena, you have to understand how things look. If you're involved in something messy, people are going to talk. Involved. As if I had chosen it. As if I had created it. I told him, carefully, I didn't do anything. That's the point. He laughed once. Not cruelly, just dismissively. Then stop acting like a victim. He said, handle it like you always do. There it was again. The role, the expectation, the convenient version of me. I ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time. And I wish I could tell you that was the worst of it. But the second round didn't stop at avoidance and judgment. It moved into blame. Natalie texted me after hearing something from our mother. You didn't tell me it was that serious. Why would you involve us in that kind of drama? As if my life being threatened was entertainment. Evan finally called late that night. His voice was low and irritated. Why are you making calls to people, he asked. You're freaking everyone out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I just asked him. Did you put my name on that agreement? He hesitated. Then he said, it wasn't like that. That's what people say when it is exactly like that. He started talking fast, about pressure, about needing a break, about believing he'd fix it before it reached me. And then, in the middle of his excuses, he said something that cut through everything. You're not going to ruin the family over this, are you? As if the family was a building and my boundaries were the fire. I told him, I'm trying to save myself. He didn't answer. He just exhaled like I had disappointed him. When the call ended, I went back to my notebook. I wrote down the dates, the phrases, the tone, and as I looked at the pages, it became impossible to deny what was happening. The first time I asked for help, they avoided responsibility. The second time I asked for support, they protected their image. No one said, this isn't fair. No one said, we'll stand with you. No one said, "You shouldn't carry this alone." Instead, the message was consistent. Don't make it our problem. And that's when something in me shifted from sadness to something colder. Not hatred, clarity. Because once you see a pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. I didn't feel powerful. I felt clean. Like I had finally stopped drinking from a cup that was poisoning me slowly. And that's when I asked myself the question that changed everything going forward. If I stopped being useful, who would still see me as family? I didn't call Aunt Ruth right away, not because I didn't love her, but because she was the one person I couldn't stand to disappoint. Everyone else in the family had a way of making you feel like you owed them, even when you didn't, even when they were the ones taking. Their help came with strings, or it came with judgment, or it didn't come at all. Ruth was different. She never made you feel smaller for needing something, and that made needing something from her feel unbearable. But after that second round of calls, after watching my situation turn into gossip and then into blame, I reached a point where pride felt less important than survival. It was a Thursday evening when I finally drove out to her place. She lived about 30 minutes outside town, where the highway turns into long stretches of open land and the streetlights start disappearing. Her house sat back from the road, modest and sun-faded, with wind chimes on the porch that always sounded like someone whispering. Her old station wagon was parked crooked in the driveway, paint peeling on the hood, a crack in the windshield that had probably been there for years. I remember noticing it and thinking, that car has seen more life than most people. When I knocked, she opened the door like she'd been expecting me, not in a suspicious way, in a quiet, steady way. "Hey, honey," she said, stepping aside. "Come in. You look like you haven't slept." Her living room smelled like lemon cleaner and something warm, maybe soup. The TV was off. A folded quilt sat on the back of the couch. There was a stack of mail on the table, neatly arranged like she didn't let things pile up. She poured me tea without asking what I wanted. Then she sat across from me, hands folded, and waited. No interrogation, no advice, just space. It took me a moment to speak, because I realized something uncomfortable. This was the first time in weeks I felt safe enough to tell the truth. I told her about the document. I told her about the calls. I told her about HR and the anonymous message, and how quickly my name had turned into a story people could reshape. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't perform. I just laid the facts down on the table like papers I couldn't keep holding alone. When I finished, she didn't gasp. She didn't get theatrical. She nodded slowly, like none of it surprised her. Then she asked one question. "Do you have anyone standing with you?" Not, "What did you do?" Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Maybe you're overreacting." Just, "Who's with you?" I swallowed hard. I shook my head, and that's when she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with an envelope. She set it on the table between us. "I can help," she said. I didn't touch it. I stared at it like it was dangerous. "Aunt Ruth, I can't," I started. She cut me off. Gently. "Listen," she said. "I'm not giving you a gift. I'm giving you time. Whatever you need to do next, you do it with your head clear, not desperate." My throat tightened. I asked her how much it was. $2,000, she said, like it was nothing. I felt my stomach drop. $2,000 wasn't nothing to her. I knew that. She lived carefully. She bought the generic brand. She fixed things instead of replacing them. She kept her life small on purpose. I pushed the envelope back toward her. "I can't take that from you," I said. She leaned in, eyes steady. "You can," she said. Because you won't waste it. And because you'd do the same for me. That was the moment I almost broke. Not because of the money, because of the certainty. Everyone else had treated my crisis like an inconvenience to manage. Ruth treated it like a person to protect. I tried again. But what if you need it? I asked. She shrugged. Then I'll figure it out. She said. I always do. It was the same phrase my family used only when she said it. It didn't sound like a way to hand me responsibility. It sounded like a promise that she wouldn't make me feel guilty for being human. I sat there for a long time, holding the envelope with both hands like it might keep me from falling apart. And then Ruth did something I didn't expect. She looked past the moment, past the crisis. She said, "You know why your family acts like that, don't you?" I didn't answer. She continued, not angry, just clear. They're used to you being the net, so they stop looking where the ground actually is. I stared at my tea, watching the steam fade. Then she stood up again and walked to a small cabinet by the hallway. She pulled out a thin folder, old, worn at the edges, and brought it back like it weighed more than paper should. She didn't hand it to me immediately. She sat down, placed it on the table, and rested her palm on top of it. "I don't talk about this much," she said. "But I want you to understand something about me, about why I'm like this." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. She opened the folder and slid out a few pages. Legal papers, settlement forms, dates from years ago. She tapped one line with her finger. "A long time ago," she said, "I was offered money. A lot of it. The kind of money that would have changed my life." My heart skipped. Ruth had never been the type to dramatize anything. If she was telling me this, it mattered. She explained it slowly. There had been an accident at a place she worked. Someone got hurt. Lawsuits started flying. People wanted signatures, statements, blame. And at some point, someone offered her a settlement, quiet money to say what they needed her to say. It would have made things easier for me, she admitted, and harder for someone else. She didn't say the name. She didn't have to. The way she said someone else told me it was someone who couldn't afford to be crushed by a system built for people with better lawyers. Ruth looked at me and said, I said no, just like that. No speech, no pride, no heroic tone, just no. Why, I asked before I could stop myself. She exhaled once, and for the first time her eyes looked tired, because I knew what it felt like to be the person who couldn't fight back. She said, and I didn't want that on my conscience. I stared at the papers, my mind trying to reconcile two versions of her, the woman with the peeling station wagon, and the woman who had once turned down life-changing money. Ruth folded the papers back into the folder and pushed it away. I didn't tell you this so you'd think I'm special, she said. I'm not. I'm just consistent. Then she leaned forward and said the line that stayed with me long after I left her house. Kindness isn't an instinct, she said. It's a decision you make over and over, especially when it costs you. I didn't cry then. I couldn't. I just sat there, absorbing the weight of it, because I realized something that made the whole story twist in my chest. Ruth didn't give because she was naive. She didn't help because she was too soft to say no. She helped because she had practiced saying no when it mattered most. She had turned down a fortune to protect someone else, and now she was offering me what little she had to protect me, not to rescue me, to steady me. When I finally stood up to leave, she walked me to the door like she always did. She didn't ask me what I planned to do next. She just said, "Don't let them make you small. Elena, not now. Not ever." I stepped onto her porch, the desert air cool against my face, wind chimes whispering behind me, and as I walked back to my truck, I realized the twist wasn't that Ruth helped me. The twist was that the person who had the least to give had the strongest boundaries, and the people who had the most had none at all. I drove home from Aunt Ruth's place with the envelope on the passenger seat like it was something fragile, not because it was cash, but because it was proof. Proof that kindness still existed. Proof that I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt. Proof that I wasn't asking for something impossible. The desert road was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. My headlights cut through dust in the air, and every few miles there was nothing but open land and a distant line of mountains. And in that silence, I kept replaying the same question. If I stopped being useful, who would still see me as family? For a long time, I thought you needed a dramatic event to answer that question. A crisis, a tragedy, some big test that forced people to reveal themselves. But that night, I realized you don't need money, or a catastrophe, or anything cinematic. Sometimes, all you have to do is stop volunteering, stop being the first one to say yes, because the truth doesn't only come out when you lose everything, it comes out when you stop being available. A lot of people think they can't relate to stories like this because they'll never be in a situation with contracts and lawyers and HR meetings. They'll say, well, that's extreme. But the pattern isn't extreme, it's ordinary. It happens in kitchens and group chats. It happens at family barbecues and office meetings. It happens in the way people treat you when you stop doing what you always do. Let me put it like this. Imagine you're the person everyone calls when they need a ride to the airport. You do it, no questions asked. Early mornings, late nights, rain, heat, whatever. Then one day, you say, I can't this time. You don't scream. You don't explain. You don't list every favor you've ever done. You just say, I can't. And then you watch what happens next. Not the words they say in that moment. The behavior after, the shift, the silence, the subtle punishment. A person who genuinely cares might be disappointed. Sure, they might even be stressed, but they'll respect you, they'll adjust. They'll ask if you're okay. A person who only values you when you're useful will do something different. They'll get irritated. They'll guilt you. They'll act like you changed. They'll tell you you're selfish for having limits. And that's how you see it. Not through money, not through drama, through absence. That's the part people don't talk about enough. You don't have to pretend you're broke to learn who's real. You don't have to stage a huge moment. You just have to stop filling the space. When you've been the solution for so long, people start confusing you with the service you provide. They stop asking, how are you? And start asking, can you? And the moment you stop being a resource, they don't just lose help, they lose control. That's why the reaction can feel so sharp. It's not that you hurt them, it's that you interrupted the system they benefited from. In my case, it wasn't the money that exposed anything, it was the fact that I refused to fix the problem quietly, the way I always had. The family wasn't falling apart because I asked for accountability. It was falling apart because I wasn't willing to carry the discomfort alone anymore. That's what Aunt Ruth understood without me having to explain it. She didn't rush in to save me. She studied me long enough to think clearly, and that clarity changed what I did next. Because once you stop operating from panic, you start seeing the game for what it is. I began to notice who was loud and who was effective. My father had the strongest opinions, the biggest speeches, the most certainty. But when responsibility showed up in the form of a signature, he disappeared. My sister had the most polished image, the most carefully managed life, but when standing beside me could have made her look messy. She called it drama. Even my mother, who always talked about family being everything, defaulted to the same instinct, protect the appearance, avoid the conflict, don't make it worse. They weren't the villains in a movie. They were something more familiar. They were people who believed the person who makes the least noise is the person who can take the most damage. That's a social belief we're taught early. Whoever stays calm must be fine. Whoever doesn't complain must not be hurting. Whoever can handle it once can handle it forever. But the truth is, the person who stays quiet often isn't okay. They're just disciplined. And discipline is invisible until it breaks. Here's the other truth I learned during that week. The winner in these situations isn't usually the person who argues the hardest. It's the person who understands the system. The person who knows when to speak and when to document. When to step back and when to take a precise step forward. My family thought power came from confidence, from being right, from talking over you until you got tired. But I was starting to see a different kind of power. Power is not making people afraid of you. Power is being unmovable without becoming cruel. Power is not being dragged into emotional chaos just because someone else needs you to react. When you stop reacting on command, the whole dynamic shifts. And that's what was happening to me. I wasn't trying to win against my family. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I was trying to survive with my dignity intact. And for the first time, I wasn't doing it by being louder. I was doing it by being clearer. That's what changes everything. Because when you're clear, you stop chasing approval. You stop begging people to see you. You stop negotiating your worth. You start moving like someone who finally remembers they have the right to protect their life. Aunt Ruth gave me more than money that night. She gave me permission to stop being endlessly available. And once I had that, I realized something that might sound simple, but it's not. The moment you stop being the automatic yes, you discover the truth. Not about them, about you. You find out what you're willing to tolerate. You find out what you've been calling love that was really just obligation. And you find out whether your silence has been peace or fear. That's when I decided the next step couldn't be emotional. It had to be strategic. Because if people were willing to let my name be damaged just to stay comfortable, then I needed to stop treating this like a family issue and start treating it like what it really was, a system, one that I finally had to understand better than they did. There's a moment people expect in stories like this, the moment where you expose everyone, where you line up the facts, where you finally say all the things you've been holding in. I used to imagine that moment too. I thought freedom would come from being heard, from making sure everyone knew exactly what they had done, how they had failed me, how unfair it all was. But that moment never came. Not because I was afraid, and not because I didn't have proof. It didn't come because I realized something quietly. Over time, I didn't need them to understand. I needed to stop needing them to. Once I started working with my lawyer, things moved in a very ordinary way. No dramatic confrontations, no raised voices, just forms, emails, timelines. My name was removed where it shouldn't have been. My position at work stabilized once facts replaced rumors. The system corrected itself, slowly, the way systems do when you stop fighting emotionally and start acting deliberately. And through all of that, no one in my family was dragged into a public reckoning. There was no showdown at the dinner table, no phone call where I listed grievances, no final speech. I simply stepped back, and that confused them more than anger ever could have. Because when you don't demand an apology, people don't know how to position themselves. They're waiting for punishment, or forgiveness, or something they can respond to. But silence, when it comes from clarity, doesn't give them that. I didn't cut anyone off. I didn't declare boundaries out loud. I just stopped filling the gaps. When someone called with a problem, I listened and didn't fix it. When someone hinted they needed help, I asked questions instead of offering solutions. When someone expected me to smooth things over, I let the discomfort stay where it belonged. At first, that made people uneasy. Then it made them distant. And eventually, it made them reveal something important. Some relationships only exist as long as you're willing to carry more than your share. Once you stop, there's nothing left to talk about. And here's the part that surprised me most. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter, because I wasn't waiting anymore for an apology that might never come, for accountability from people who avoided it, for closure that depended on someone else changing. There's a myth we grow up with, that justice always looks like consequences, that healing requires someone else to admit they were wrong, that freedom comes from watching the people who hurt you finally get it. Sometimes that happens. Often, it doesn't. And tying your peace to that outcome keeps you trapped longer than the situation ever did. What I learned is this: not everyone who hurts you needs to be punished. Not everyone who disappoints you needs to be confronted. Not every story needs a villain to be resolved. Some people don't grow. They don't reflect. They don't suddenly understand. And waiting for them to do so keeps you standing in the same place, rehearsing the same pain. Walking away quietly isn't weakness. It's efficiency. It's choosing not to spend your energy on a lesson someone never asked to learn. My family still sees themselves as good people. They're not monsters. They're just people who got comfortable letting someone else carry the weight. And when that stopped being an option, they adjusted their distance instead of their behavior. That used to hurt. Now it just informs me. Because once you see people clearly, you don't need revenge. You need alignment. You don't need them to suffer. You need space to build something that doesn't depend on them. I didn't announce my withdrawal. I redesigned my life. I made choices that didn't require permission. I built routines that didn't revolve around fixing other people's messes. I invested in stability, not approval. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The anger faded, not because it wasn't justified, but because it wasn't useful anymore. Anger is heavy, and I had already carried enough. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness in the dramatic sense. It was acceptance. Acceptance that some people can love you and still fail you. Acceptance that family doesn't automatically mean safety. Acceptance that being needed is not the same as being valued. And once you accept that, you're free to make cleaner choices. You stop over-explaining. You stop negotiating your limits. You stop waiting for permission to protect your peace. I didn't win against anyone. I reclaim myself. And that didn't require anyone else to lose. If you're listening to this, and you're holding on to the hope that one day they'll finally see it, finally apologize, finally change, I understand that hope, but I also want you to hear this. Your freedom does not depend on their growth. You don't need them to feel guilty. You don't need them to admit anything. You don't need a dramatic ending. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the quiet one, the one where you step out of the cycle without slamming the door, the one where you choose peace over being right, the one where you stop waiting for someone else to become safe and you become safe for yourself. That's not giving up. That's moving on. And it's something no one can take from you. So before this ends, I want to leave you with one question. Not a challenge, not advice, just a question you can carry with you. What would happen if, just for today, you stopped carrying everything, not forever, not dramatically? Just today. What if you didn't rush to fix the problem that isn't yours? What if you didn't explain yourself one more time to someone who already decided how they see you? What if you didn't step in just to keep the peace? I used to think that if I stopped, everything would fall apart. The family, the balance, the image people had of me. But most things don't fall apart when you step back. They reveal their true shape. Some people will adjust. Some will drift. Some will be uncomfortable. And that discomfort doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means the weight finally moved back to where it belongs. If you're watching this and you feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, if you're the one people rely on but rarely check on, if your silence has been mistaken for endless capacity, this question isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to give you permission. Permission to pause. Permission to say, not right now. Permission to protect the part of you that's been quietly holding everything together. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to burn bridges. Sometimes all you have to do is stop running back onto the bridge every time someone shakes it. So ask yourself, honestly, if you didn't carry it today, who would pick it up? And more importantly, what space would that give you to finally breathe?